HigherEd Web Conference 2023, making the move to GA4. Hello, everyone. I'm your presenter today. Thank you for joining us as we go through making the move from Universal Analytics to GA4. My name is Trevor Mazarura, Director of Analytics here at Carnegie, where we specialize in digital marketing for higher education. Since we'll be spending some time together, a little fun fact about myself is I have 17 siblings distributed around 5 countries and 3 continents, ranging from age from 25 to 55. So you can imagine how many nephews and nieces I have, or at least the potential to have for a lot of nephews and nieces. So there's a good chance one of them will be coming to your school in the near future. Today's agenda, just to lay the lay of the land, is we'll talk about why GA4. A lot of you may already know, but I figured we'll start off with that so that we just cover those bases before we go into what's new and exciting about it. And then next we'll go into how to get going with GA4. We're hoping by the end of this by the end of today, you'll feel very comfortable about making this big transition from Universal Analytics, and we'll also share some tips and tricks for how we've approached it and how we've helped our clients move from Universal Analytics to GA4. And we're also hoping that you can take our framework, at least find some parts of our framework that we've used so that you can use it for your own migration from Universal Analytics to GA4. Why GA4? Well, as you may know already, Universal Analytics is sunsetting. So with that, we have to make that migration. And if you're already using Google Analytics, you're comfortable in that platform, you might already be ready to make that move and at least start to get comfortable and know that some things have changed, but some things also remain the same. So it's still the same platform in the sense that you'll still be able to get those same insights from GA4 that you were getting from Universal Analytics, but with some major improvements. With that said, some important dates to remember. Quickly approaching is July 2023, where UA will stop collecting new data. That means you can still have it connected, but it just won't be sending any new hits to your Google Analytics. December 2023, UA 360 stops collecting new data. And typically we see very few universities that have UA 360. This is a premium version of Google Analytics where you pay about $150,000 a year. January 2024, you lose access to your UA data, in that you won't be able to go into the platform to get that data. So that's a quick time frame to think. That's a time frame to think about as far as from now till January 2024 to think about how you'll be able to extract that data from Universal Analytics and then store it in a warehouse. That way, you have that data for future reference. With the sunsetting of Universal Analytics, as we mentioned, exciting and new comes the new sunrise with GA4. So this GA4 you speak of, I'm taking a step back and just understanding the historical of Universal Analytics. It started off with Urchin, which was focused on UTM tracking, which you may be familiar with as you use UTMs, or we recommend using UTMs when you're setting up any campaigns. So from then it went into classic Google in 2007. And then from there also still making strides in that it was continuing to improve, and then moved to Universal Analytics in 2012. And this was all patching the system, and then the major change came in 2020 when Google introduced GA4. GA4 is built with the future in mind, with an evolving landscape. As you may know, with Universal Analytics, it was really built for websites. But now there's a lot of other channels of data that users can use to come to your website. And then there's also apps where you'll need to track, or you'll want to track, how users are interacting with your apps. So with GA4, you're able to track your web data as well as any apps that you have. Some quick hits as far as GA4 versus universal analytics. GA4 has artificial intelligence and machine learning. So, for example, with machine learning, the home screen will, after a period of time of using it, it'll be able to adjust the home screen so that when you come onto the interface, it'll know typically the way that you navigate through the home screen. So it'll set it up for you so that it's you don't have to keep clicking through everything to get to where you typically go. There's also improved user identification for better reporting. You'll be able to track users when they come from the different platforms, and then also built with a future of cookies going away. One major thing that a lot of users of universal analytics have relied on is the bounce rate, which is a metric that I know many of you have been asked, how is the bounce rate going? Why is the bounce rate so high? Why is the bounce rate so low? With bounce rate, that's no longer available in GA4. It is somewhat available, but you have to use engagement rate. And then to get to bounce rate, you use the inverse. But it's not going to be apples to apples with the bounce rate in universal analytics because of the way that engagement rate is calculated. So, for example, if a user came to one of your landing pages and then they didn't do anything, but they consumed the content that you wanted them to consume, that may be considered as a bounce because they didn't take any other action, even though they were there long enough to consume and did what you wanted them to do, which was educate them about something on the web page. Engagement rate, that will be taken into account that the user came in and they stayed there for a period of time, so that will be called an engaged session. There's also improved data model for events. It goes away from what we had in the way that events were set up in universal analytics, where you had the category and other sections of just creating an event. Everything now in GA4 is considered an event. There's also the BigQuery integration. What this does is it allows you to connect your GA4 to your to BigQuery, which is a self-managed data warehouse in the cloud. This was only available if you're paying for the paid version of Google Analytics, which is the 360. But excited that with just the standard version of GA4, you are able to get that connection. And we'll go a little bit deeper into what that helps, how you can use that to your benefit. The major changes that we're talking about, we'll just quickly go through those, is tech. There's a lot of changes in tech. As we mentioned, the landscape has evolved. Users can now access your website, or you want to track your users in way different forms. For example, with privacy issues from the different platforms as they're going. And then also there's connected TV. So there's just a huge landscape and a lot of technologies that you will need to analyze. With GA4, it provides you with the ability to do all this. If a certain company decides that, for example, Facebook decides that they don't want to track certain things, they don't want to send cookies here, there, you'll be able to adjust to GA4. GA4 will be able to adjust that. In the absence of cookies, it'll be able to use machine learning to identify users. Also, there's changes in the law. The landscape for the law is ever evolving as the government or governments are now more focused on making sure that companies are abiding by the laws as far as tracking users. As you know, with technology, laws usually lag how technology is, but the government is quickly catching up. So what was acceptable in the past is no longer accepted. As an example, the shot heard around the world with Sephora, which violated CCPA, and they were fined 1.2 million. We see this as just a warning shot to say that there's more scrutiny about consumer privacy, because Sephora used some information without the consent of users, and that led to them getting fined 1.2 million. So it's really more focus on that. So we'll recommend you taking that into account as you are tracking, as what you're tracking, and making sure that you abide by the different laws. And GA4 gives you somewhat control over what you can track and making sure that you have the privacy policies on your websites. Users are also changing, quickly adapting. One, they are going from different devices, as we mentioned earlier, but they also have more control. They now have a voice, or a bigger voice, and the governments are listening, or lawmakers are listening, as far as users can now decide if they don't want to be tracked. So that can affect you as far as what you're tracking, which campaigns a user, how you're tracking your campaigns, or what you can track when a user comes to your website. And also, users have the ability or the power now to be able to ask a company or an organization that, please, can you remove all the information that you have about me? GA4 gives you that control, in that when you send your data to BigQuery, as we mentioned earlier, you can then scrub out any of the information that you are collecting on a user that has been sent to GA4 if they ask for that. The question is, what happens if we do nothing? Well, we'll use an analogy of, say you're on a road trip with your friends, your family, whatever, and you in the driver's seat. You have a clear vision of where you're going, as far as you have technology in the car, whether it's the rear view mirror that allows you to look in the back, you have the windshield, and then you can see forward. You can look all around and have a 360 view of everything that's coming, that's everything around you. So you continue on, you have technology, you're able to see your GPS as far as where you're going, and the people in your car can also play music, adjust the AC. They can see where the AC is. You can see where the fuel is, how fast you're going. And then again, looking at the rear view mirror, is someone too close to you? Are you too close to traffic? You have all this visibility. So imagine now you continue on that journey. Your analytics is gone. You have no visibility as to what you where you're going, and also your users will continue to ask questions. They want to know, for example, are we there yet? How fast are we going? Do we have enough gas? And these are questions that you'll be asking yourself too. Where are we turning? What's that behind us? What's that noise? Are we flying? Is the heat on? These are questions that your internal stakeholders will be asking you. So in your case, since this is universities, your dean may ask you, how did that campaign perform? How come, are we seeing improved bounce rate on those pages that we're initially seeing? And you may start to feel overwhelmed, and we don't blame you. But the good thing is you're not alone. There's a lot of other, this is not just specific to higher education, but all industries that are using GA4, or at least using universal analytics, are facing it. And we're really hoping that when we share what we've learned and then our framework, you'll be able to feel comfortable. We wanted for your internal stakeholders not to feel that gap. We wanted it to be a smooth transition, and we believe with this framework you'll be able to create that. So your internal stakeholders won't feel that bump. They'll just feel like it's smoothly going up and everything is still fine. The framework that we're recommending, and you don't have to follow this framework, but this is what has worked for us great when we've been transition our clients from universal analytics to GA4, is really to have a great approach or standardized approach for how we do the migration. There are 5 steps to the process: the audit, and I'll go into these steps as we go along. The audit, measurement plan, event and goal tracking, BigQuery integration, and then finally the Looker Studio development. As I said, you don't have to follow this framework, but we found this to be very useful as a structured approach. The audit is really going into your GA4 implementation and ensuring that everything's configured correctly. As you can imagine, GA4 is used by many industries, as I mentioned earlier. And so it's not really designed for a specific industry, let alone is it designed for your school. So you have to go in and make some tweaks to adjust and use recommended best practices as far as how you can utilize it for higher education. For example, in the settings, standard data retention is 2 months. For higher education, would recommend to change that to 14 months, just because in higher education, as you know, the conversion time is really a long period of time. In other industries, 2 months may be great because they can come. You're expecting your users to come in, purchase something, and then move on, and then maybe later come back. But as higher education, you might have a student fill out an RFI today, and then later on they may come back, maybe 2-3 months down the line, they may come back and maybe start an application. So it's really important for you to have that data for a longer period of time. The other thing that we recommend as you're looking at the audit is, as I mentioned, the settings, but also making sure that you're not collecting any personally identifiable information. What we've seen in higher education, this occurs typically when someone is filling out an RFI, or they're creating an account, or even sometimes someone might be logging in. And this information is added to the end of the URL, and then it's sent to Google Analytics. There's no issue collecting PII as long as you are maintaining it and then not sharing it with third parties. Google Analytics is considered a third party. And what may happen is if Google does identify that you are sending PII to Google, they may shut down your Google Analytics account. So it's really important, one, just to be transparent, to make your users more comfortable that you are not using their data or sharing the data in any way that that is not recommended. And then during this process too, we recommend to look to see what your privacy policies are before you enable some features in Google in your GA4. So for example, Google Signals, you just want to make sure that you have a privacy policy on your website, so that it tells users what you're collecting and then also how you're using that information. So we find this as really the foundation of what you proceed from there. And once you've identified everything, we recommend to share it with your internal stakeholders. And then as you make internal stakeholders, document it so that you can always go back to it. It's not a set it and forget it, in that things may change in the landscape and then Google may make some changes. So we recommend to always do an audit at least every year. The next step is something that we're really excited about, which is the measurement plan development. Approaching GA4 not as renovating universal analytics or inheriting the old system of analytics, someone that was set up by someone in the past, inheriting a legacy system. It's really building your analytics house from the ground up. You're planning. This is a stage where you sit with your internal stakeholders, see what their needs are, and then start to plan and look into the future as far as what their current needs are and what they may need in the future. During this process too, you may find that there's tracking that's missing on certain pages. Then you'll talk to your developers to add tracking, for example, deploying GTM on certain pages and ensuring that you have that sorted out. And one step that I forgot to mention within the audit, and then this can also happen during the measurement plan development, is identifying pages where you have duplicate tracking. What we've seen is, and what we recommend is deploying GA4 using Google Tag Manager. In some cases, we've seen schools where they've deployed GA4 through Google Tag Manager and then also via the source code. And what this will cause is duplicate tracking, and this will mess up your data. You won't have a clean picture of how your users are interacting with your website. The visitors may be inflated because they're being double counted as they come to the website. This is the framework that we use for GA4 measurement plan, and this doesn't necessarily have to be for GA4. It could have been used for universal analytics or any analytics tracking that you're deploying. Is just coming together with your internal stakeholders and understanding what they need, and then also anticipating what they may need. They may not know what they need in the future. So as the analytics team, we recommend that you listen to what they're saying, but also anticipate what they may need. For example, if they're running a brand awareness campaign with a goal of increasing traffic, there's some metrics that are already in GA4, but it's good to spell those out as far as is it already being collected? And then also, how can they utilize that data, or what are the metrics that they need to use? Maybe it's new users, user sessions. And then if, for example, the objective is to have website content engagement, increase user interactions, increase time spent, then those are some metrics that already are being tracked. Engagement rate, for example, engaged sessions, pages per session, and then average engagement time, average engagement time per session. With this framework too, you can do custom event tracking to go beyond just what is automatically collected by GA4. For example, homepage call to action buttons, admissions call to action buttons, and then maybe apply now button clicks. And once you develop in this measurement plan, we also recommend that you talk to internal stakeholders so that they just don't utilize these metrics in any way. For example, if you wanted to increase time on a page or time on the website, increasing time is not necessarily a good thing. It depends on where you are in the process. Reading a blog, you might want to increase time, but there's some some steps that are not value add for the user. For example, filling out an application or an RFI. Those should really be a breeze. So it's good to segment your data to ensure that if you're looking at increased time spent, which section of the website are you looking at? Lead generation with a goal capturing leads. This is where you may want to look at macro versus micro conversions, with the macro being the overarching conversion. So for example, if the main thing to do is increase applications or increase visit registrations, to build up to that, you need to have micro conversions, those little steps that users will take so that they go to the bigger picture of the application submissions. So for example, with application submissions, your micro conversion could be account creations. It could also be RFI. So this is not set in stone. The team just has to come together and understand what the macro conversions are, and then what are the little steps that you need to take in order to reach that macro conversion. We also recommend segmenting your data, again, to understand whether it be which section of the site, marketing channel, new versus returning, device category, geographic location, demographics. These are just some of the examples that you can use to understand or to segment your data so that you understand which users you're trying to attract. Maybe internal stakeholders need certain things from your website. You need to be able to segment that data to get more granular level insights. During this process too, as I mentioned, you may discover that some of these things are not possible to implement. For example, if you have a third party, if your applications are hosted on a third-party site, you might not be able to add your GA4 tracking or GTM or any other tracking, so to say. Then maybe you can use a proxy for application submissions. That could be how many button clicks to apply now are there. That way you can still set it up as a macro, as a conversion. That way, when you're using within the platform of GA4 attribution modeling, which requires you to have set conversions, then you can use those proxy conversions as a way to do the attribution modeling. And some items, and then even with third-party vendors, we recommend to always ask if you can add your own GTM, your own tracking, because one, you might think that they're not able to do it. And then two, if they're not able to do it currently, if they hear many of the schools asking for the same thing, then they might shift their mindset and say, this is really something all our clients are asking for. And then it might be an option that in the future they'll add it. And with this too, is that some things, as I mentioned, may not be able to be added now, but it's good to document everything that you've been able to implement so that in the future, when you come back, you'll be able to see how everything is configured and then see what you're able to track, what was important that you were able to track, what was important but you are not able to track, and then always constantly revisit. The next step is the event and goal implementation. This is a part where you may need a lot more stakeholders. As I mentioned, it might be that you don't have tracking on certain areas of the page, so analytics will need the developers to add that tracking, and then also ensuring that at every point you are testing. So the event and goal implementation will be driven off what you'd have identified during the measurement plan process. We recommend that as you implement these events and goals being the conversions, that you always test them to ensure that they are firing correctly. And also we recommend to have a event tracking worksheet so that you know what goals you have, what events you have, and also how these events are configured. That way, with goals and events, they're not a set it and forget it. That way, in the future, when you need to come back, if one breaks, you'll know how it's configured. Or if a new team member comes, they'll know how to set up the other events are set up, and then they can follow that same methodology. Always ensuring that you have the same naming convention, and then following same naming conventions, and then also anticipating that you send in this information may go to your BigQuery. So ensuring that the naming convention is alignment with how the data will be received in BigQuery, because you'll need to use SQL code to get access to that data. And then the next step, which is second to final, will be that Google Analytics to GA4. As I mentioned, GA4 BigQuery is a fully managed data warehouse owned by Google. And as I mentioned earlier, this was only available if you're paying for the premium Universal Analytics. But exciting with GA4 is that you're now able to do this with just the standard version of Google Analytics. A few things that are advantageous for this are: one, with GA4, you're limited as far as how much data you can collect, 14 months storage. But when you send it to GA4, then you have to BigQuery, then you have a longer time period. So it's pretty much however long you want to store that data. For high traffic website, we recommending to budget about $20 a month. So high traffic will be probably like 10 million hits. Using higher education, there's very, very few schools that hit that 10 million threshold. The way that you can predict how much storage you'll need is looking at the hits in your Universal Analytics and seeing what the hits for the last 30 days, and then maybe adding a little bit more to puff it up for seasonality. So say it comes out to 350,000 hits. You might want to just put in the estimator for 400,000 hits. That way, at least you just accounting for any seasonality. Once you do this connection, we recommend the data from GA4 will come in as just events into BigQuery. We recommend that you do not query off the events because if the data comes in as nested, meaning that one line may actually have several other lines nested within it. When you're querying, this may cause issues. Your data may be inaccurate. And then it's a really steep learning curve for any of the even advanced SQL users to be able to query that data in the nested. And we also think that this will cause you to go over the limits for as far as querying, because with BigQuery, there's a two layers of cost, which is one, the storage cost, and then there's also the querying cost. So we just recommend to unnest this data. One, you can do this by writing your own SQL code, or you can use a third-party tool to unnest the data. That's just means putting it into a flat table standard as a standard with any the typical data warehouse. That way, it's easier for you to query. And then also addressing the issue as we'll go into Looker Studio. Actually, I might as well go there next. which will be the final step that we'll recommend, is to build your Looker Studio. You could use also Tableau, but we found Looker Studio to be good for us because, one, it's free, and then it's also likely to play with Google products, well, with the exception of GA4. Because we've seen, as you may have noticed, with GA4 connected state to Looker Studio, you may be running into quota limits where the dashboards really become useless, for lack of a better word. So instead of you connecting straight to GA4, this is also where BigQuery comes into play, in that once you have that field, that data into a flat table, you can then connect your Looker Studio. Your users won't see a difference other than performance will be really good. It'll really be, when you filter anything, it'll load very fast. So we would recommend to build the Looker Studio using the BigQuery. With that said, we also recommend using Looker Studio so that your internal stakeholders don't have to really know how to use GA4, but instead you can direct them here, and then have one source of truth, where your high level stakeholders, for example, the dean, likely doesn't have time to learn how to use GA4, but instead you can direct them to this Looker Studio, just similar like driving a car. Everyone pretty much knows what metrics to look at because you have the dashboard. And then when the light comes on, maybe that's when your high-level stakeholders will come to the analytics team and start to ask questions as far as, why is this like that? And then that's like similar to taking the car to the shop, where the analytics team will then start to dig into the issues. And we'll recommend too, for this stage, to work with your internal stakeholders. If they have frequently asked questions, then at least you can guide them with this Data Studio dashboard, and then build different views based on the different questions that they ask. We typically will recommend to always add filters at the top navigation. That way, if, for example, or someone wants to look at the campaign, they can just click the drop down, look at the campaign that they're interested in, and then everything should flow through into the dashboard if everything's configured correctly. This way, you don't have people coming to ask you, and then you having to go into GA4 and answer something simple that could just be answered within the dashboard. And then also here, they can also slice and dice the time frame. This is a typical view that would recommend for just the high level website overview, website health, where your users can quickly come in. And then have the top KPIs here, and also look through how things are trending over time, because the absolute numbers may not always tell the complete pictures. They may be misleading. Maybe you ran a campaign on the previous month. That's why all of a sudden it's dropped in the current month. So it's always good to look at the trends. And then looking at the different device types, so that you just understand how which users, how your users are coming, as far as a desktop, as a mobile. This will also give you information as you're addressing website redevelopment. Maybe if you see high level traffic on mobile, you want to make your mobile experience just as good a desktop, if not better. And then also we recommend to always look at which days of the week your site is most popular. Maybe you want to push new content on the days where you have high traffic, and then maintenance might be done on the days that you have the least amount of traffic. So with that said, hopefully you feel comfortable, at least somewhat confident about making that move from Universal Analytics to GA4. With that said, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Keep calm and keep measuring.